Hey Ricky, you know what's awesome?
What's that, Billy?
Creepshow and Creepshow 2.
Absolutely.
Oh man. So, this is one of those, just like we talked about, like Smoking the Bandit or whatever, that Creepshow 2 was, I was like, 12 years old when that came out. So, that hit me, it's like, so watching the first Creepshow, like it had been around, I'd seen it or whatever, but Creepshow 2 is the one that is in my heart. Like
Wow.
that's the Creepshow. As you can see, I'm wearing my cool bootleg Creepshow shirt that I got from Texas Frightmare Weekend. But yeah, but the whole series though, like you could pretty much play them all back to back anthology series, and it's awesome.
Yeah.
So, how about
Yeah.
yourself? How'd you come along?
I jumped on when the first one came out and just never looked back, man. It was I'm that way about the first one, and actually had a copy of it duped onto a Betamax tape that I watched at my
Nice.
dad's house a lot. And I mean, the first one to me, of course, you got the Savini effects going on, and wow, I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about these as we go. Hey, my phone's slipping, taking off on me.
Got a little bit.
Yeah. And so I do love the second one too, man. Thanks for the ride, lady.
Yeah.
Got me as a kid.
Thanks. Well, all of them. That's what I'm saying. It's like, because there's only three, and so the impact of each one, and again, not specifically that any one of them's better than anyone in the first one. I just remember specifically, obviously, the raft and being like just sitting there, just oh my god, it made you scared of tar bars at the beach. It made
Yeah.
you scared of paper or plastic bags. If you ever went to someplace and saw trash floating in a lake, you're like, oh, that's the thing.
Yeah.
Like that's the bad
Absolutely,
thing.
man. And when you're a kid and you're swimming, do you not look back and think, man, I hope
I'll
nothing-
tell you what.
I hope the toxic muck is not chasing me.
Yeah, so since we're filming here, this is my good, like, perfect condition VHS of Creepshow.
Nice.
I was gonna get Tom Savini to sign, but I forgot it back at the hotel. Which, when Scott and I went there last time, it was like a good 45-minute shuttle ride back and forth to where we'd go over there and like load up on loot, and then check the schedule to make sure there wasn't anything super awesome going on, and then go back and dump it all off, and then go back and get more. And I'd forgotten my creep show. But
Man. I've got just the old plain Jane up here, so yeah. So just the old regular that
Yep.
style. All right.
the old school, the original, yeah.
Yeah, we need to upgrade.
But nah, dude, like, that's one thing about anthologies too, is you can kind of come into it. You don't have to watch the whole movie. You can just pop it in, and that was what was so cool about getting this. I got this one at a thrift store. It was 30-year-old VHS, but it hadn't been rewound. So when I popped it in, it was starting like right on the crate. I was like,
Wow.
whoever ended the movie last time ended on the end of with Leslie Nielsen drowning,
Right.
and then like right into Fluffy.
I'm not going any further than that.
Yeah, but then you just rewound it and watched it through. But no, dude, like, and then you've got this trifecta of horror godhood.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like all the stories are written by Stephen King, who was completely at his super coked out prime. Like this is the drugged out Stephen King that the 80s were made of.
Yep.
And you have Tom Savini, who's already pretty well established as a special effects guy, but he's still doing like horror effects with like corn syrup and oatmeal, and he's still experimenting with different stuff. Which I'm pretty sure he still does. Those guys don't ever really grow out of the simplicity that got them where they are. They just figure out new and different ways to make it last longer, I guess.
And Savini is a story all to himself. I mean, if you do any study of kind of his background, which I do have something that I'm going to post on our YouTube channel, kind of a special thing that is Savini related. And yeah, I mean, when you hear him talk about his experiences in Vietnam, he was a photographer in Vietnam, and that's where all this came from. He just imagined, well, you could take a little of this, a little of that, a little meatloaf or a little oatmeal, and there you go. And it was the industry standard. Nobody was doing what he was capable of doing at that time. And yeah, these movies are full of fantastic effects. And you take people, all the K&B guys under his wing, teaching them how to do all the stuff, and look where they've taken it. I mean, they're award-winning effects team. So yeah, Savini's the man.
Yeah, dude. We were talking about Rick Baker, last week before, I don't know. At some point we were talking about special effects and Rick Baker and practical effects, and, and those guys just come, again, from a... And Savini, too, I know his history in Vietnam, but whenever he was trying to put together visual effects, when he's going to work in the movies and he's like, okay, well, let's make something look like something. There wasn't a batch. Like, you can go down to the Halloween store now and you can buy latex and you can buy blood. You can at least buy some prefab stuff. That stuff didn't exist back then. They were inventing it. And, so the director's like, okay, this scene calls for some extra gory face gook. And then he's sitting around goes to the grocery store. Like, literally, like, going to the grocery store or, mixing up rubber and latex and stuff. And, Rick Baker was saying, he's like, man, he's surprised he's not dead because he's in his bedroom working with some of these, like, highly toxic chemicals, like, mixing up these wounds and stuff. But, you do it for the love. And it was guys like Savini and Rick Baker and Greg Nicotero that really... I think it brought me into a love of horror movies that are kind of outside of the story.
Absolutely.
That is just very much more in the art and the crafting of it. It's like you need to create a monster.
Man. I mean, that was the draw to picking up the Fangoria magazines, right? Not only were we going to see the effects, but a lot of time they would show you how they're kind of pulling it off in some points. I mean, it made it just a fantastic thing. You had to figure out, wow, somebody's warped mind come up with this.
Well, and I've got a little Pumpkinhead man on my bench out in the garage. I've got some video. It's going to come out, be about a 2-minute video. I had built this. He's just a torso. It's just this little ground burster Pumpkinhead man. And I made 5-fingered hands. They're oversized 5-fingered hands, and they came up out of the ground. But I've made them like 5 years ago, so the paint chipped off and the tape came off, and they're looking pretty raggedy. So, and whenever props that you make kind of start getting raggedy, they get annoying because things fall off of them, and you're constantly trying, like, you have to put them in a bag or whatever. So I was like, you know what? Either I'm going to retire them and just chuck them, or I'm gonna rebuild them. And so I got little Pumpkin Man a couple days ago and set him up on my bench, and this time I did it right with the proper tape, and then I wrapped him in string, and then I wrapped him in saran wrap, and then heat gunned it so it's all gnarly. Then the paint and the dry brush, and this is a little monster sitting on my he looks pretty awesome. So I can't wait to show that video to everybody because
Savini Jr.
That's what I want, man. Just like, I mean, I've got 2 little kids. I always say that, like, my big Halloween stuff is, like, I like to scare kids, but I like to scare them in the happy, spooky sort of way.
Right.
Not like overly, but at the same time, sometimes you just put some PVC stuff together, it doesn't look right. So made it look all kind of Swamp Thing, and it's pretty rad. But cool. Yeah, man.
So I guess we just go back and start it the first episode and chug along through this, or
Let's
how do you
roll
want
on,
to talk
man.
about these?
That
'Cause,
sounds good to me. The
I
best
mean,
way to watch them's in order, I guess.
the first one, the first story, was always one that kind of drug when you first watched it, right, as a kid, because you got the whole family situation and the old rich guy that's passed away, and they're all wanting the money, and man, the crazy comic book feel that they give the things when things start getting a little off kilter, right? When things start getting a little weird, you get the weird color designs in the background. You know, we can sit here and talk about all the Marvel movies and capturing the comic book stuff. Man, they made this movie look like a comic book, and it's amazing.
They really did, and I like the effect of like taking from the kid who's reading the comic book and then having it zoom in on a scene at the beginning of the story, and then having it zoom out at the end where it's it's drawn in there. So it's like, And I've always said, it's like whenever they were making superhero movies like Spider-Man or whatever, and they change characters and make them weird, and you're like, but you've already got like decades of storyboarding.
Right.
So I love the fact that they took a Stephen King story, they wrote a comic book, literally like they storyboarded it out to make a movie out of it, and then they made a comic book out of the movie and just kind of circled back around, the snake eating its tail. But it worked so wonderful.
And we didn't even talk about the opening, right? You got your bookends that kind of tie it all together. And, I mean, come on. Tom Atkins, man. I mean, what can you say? It's Tom Atkins, and it's Stephen King's son, right? It's in the bedroom.
Yep. And then you got the creep looking in the window with those weird eyes.
Yeah. And I just love the fact of he had that Rodan that was hanging down from his ceiling. That was one of those toys that I always wish I would have gotten, but and I passed it up. We were talking about going back to the mall. One of the first times I went to the mall, they had one of those, and I didn't get it, and I've regretted it ever since.
Man, it's weird with stuff like that. It's like when I was a kid, there was I was not wanting for anything, right? Like when I had a big family, somebody would reach out to my mom and be like, "Hey, what's he into?" And she'd be like, "He-Man." And then like for Christmas, I'd get all the He-Man because I had like 20 aunts and uncles, and they'd all buy me one, and they'd just all show up, right? So it was never a matter of me being like, "Oh, poor me," is not the thing. It was a thing that I never had that I wish I did. But it's always the ones that you didn't have that you always remember kind of almost more than the ones you did, where you're like,
right.
It's like, oh, I remember that jet. I'm like, oh, I had that jet. You're like, I didn't have that jet. Like, but yeah, like you say with the Rodans, like every now and then you're like, there's certain things that I wish I had, and now I'm old and I've got money. So that's you saw the video that just posted to YouTube.
There you go. Yeah.
Like a lot of that's back from the future. Like I've collected that since because I lost it all to guitars and girls back in the day.
Yeah, I get the feeling, man. Same here. But yeah, man, the first one, like I said, as watching it as a kid, you're not really into the dialogue, but when you get older, you can appreciate it more because it hits more with the family, right? Mm-hmm. And
plus, I mean, I didn't watch it too long ago either, and it is a little convoluted. It is a little hard to understand because while they're trying to get the exposition out, they're trying to explain what happened. They're also fighting. So without having like a narrator to be like, okay, well, this person's this person and that person's that person, and the reason things are weird is because this and this and this. It kind of plays out, and you really kind of don't know what's going on till the end. So as a kid, you're kind of like, I don't get it. It's just people kind of, it's Ed Harris dancing very strangely.
That's what I was going to say. They're either fighting or they're dancing. That's your two choices.
But man, whenever that gravestone comes down, and gets him, that is brutal.
Yeah.
Like, and he's in that position where he's not getting out. Like every time he moves, the grave moves just a little bit more. He moves, and it moves a little bit more. So, like, he can just stay there and get squished, or he can try to get out and get squished. Like, he's stuck. Yeah. And
Yeah, by the time that when he first comes out of the grave and all that, from there on you're hooked, right? Like I said, you kind of get through that dialogue part, but as soon as that happens, from there on, there's no stopping this show. And
Yeah.
wow, I mean, the whole thing. I mean, how iconic is it to see that skeleton holding that platter and saying, "I finally got my cake"? I mean, I've seen it so many times, and it never gets old.
No, it does. It does not. And then the candle's sticking out of her head.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, how did this thing go? And it's one thing that it ripped a woman's head off. It's the other thing that it found the icing, put the icing on, stuck candles in it, and lit it. And I'm like, how good does his hands really work?
Good enough. I mean, he's
Good
a
enough,
badass.
apparently.
Yeah. Well, that's another thing too. Is like he's like, I want my cake, and he's like, what are you talking about? Like, he's some dead guy, and he's but he gets it. He gets it in the end. And,
He sure does. Oh man.
But yeah, and to pull a Hail Ming, you need to watch. You need a reason to watch this segment. Ed Harris's dance. Like,
Ed Harris.
It's almost the same as it's not as cringeworthy as Crispin Glover in Friday the 13th Part 4, but it's similar. It's
I think Ed Harris is more confident in what he's doing because he even gets that little white man chicken neck strut thing he does. That just thing. He gets his lips pooched out and starts doing his neck. It's like, yeah, don't do that, man.
Love that Friday the 13th Part 4 dance sequence. Like the girl's dancing all normal, and she's just like doing the best she can not to laugh. Like she's trying real hard not to laugh at this dude.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, those are
Incredible.
two great dance sequences from from the 80s. All right, so moving on, man. The lonesome death of Jordy Verrill.
Man, this is one of those things that, just like you're talking about with the kids, it's gateway horror right here because scare me, but don't scare me too much, except at the very end of this thing, right?
Yeah. It ends like it's goofy. Like he mumbles and he's dumb and he's not supposed to touch it and he touches it and he's got like it's like the I don't know, it's like he's got like a paper bag. It's like whenever you see magicians have that like it's like tape or something and he's just like ugh. But he's not smart enough to like get it actually off of him.
Yeah.
But then in the end you realize that the world's ending. Like it's just a very, very bleak sort of thing.
And the whole thing in his mind about, wow, this is going to make me a lot of money, and then when it breaks, then he goes through the scenario of it not being worth any money, and just all the crazy, I want to say daydreams, but that's not really what it is, but his imagination of, like, the doctor visit and all this kind of stuff is so bizarre. I don't remember seeing anything like that as a kid until this movie. And it definitely was something that drew me in because I had never seen anything like that.
Well, I think, too, that Creepshow is one of those that, because it is an adaptation of Stephen King books and stories, but prior to that, it's like you have big studios making a 2-hour movie out of a 500-page book, and they cut out a lot of the subplots, and they took their creative liberties with it, and yada, yada, yada. Whereas with these little short stories, you actually get to see, Creepshow plays out like Stephen King short stories read.
Yep.
So if you read a Skeleton Crew or Different Seasons or those kind of books, the narratives, the internal dialogues of the characters and the bizarre things that they see and think and do that makes it so creepy, which makes for great horror, you lose a lot of that in other Stephen King movies. Like, they couldn't really do it in Christine, right? But like and I think Christine's a great adaptation of Stephen King, but in the book, the guy who sells him the car in the movie was like the guy's brother, right? And he's like, oh, he was whatever. But in the book, that guy had a much bigger role, and he was and they went into much more detail in that guy and his life and who he was, and he was not a nice dude.
Right.
Like, he was a really bad dude. So when you're watching Christine, for example, you're kind of like, okay, so he's got a haunted car, and that's pretty much what you see in the movie. Like, he's got a haunted car.
Yeah.
Whereas you realize that dude went to great lengths to make... There was a lot of stuff that happened that made the car kind of imbued with that negative energy and stuff. So Creepshow does that very well, in that it leaves those weird things into the stories and doesn't make the stories that much longer. You just see how bizarre the characters really are.
And that's the thing, is because when you're pushing a 20-minute kind of time limit, you don't have to pad it, right? I mean, you pretty much just march straight ahead with it. And that's another thing that's pretty amazing about these, because I don't think any of them feel padded. Maybe the first one, but being that it's kind of a build-up kind of story, it kind of works there. I look at these as like, I don't know if did you ever watch any Night Gallery?
Every now and then, whenever I caught them, but yeah.
This was like really good versions of Night Gallery. And, again, 20-minute, 30-minute time period. Yeah, man, they were killing it on this, I think. And it's a roller coaster ride. Again, even with the second one, the character that Stephen King's playing, and the fact that he's such a numbskull, and by the end of it, you get the phobias, right? The one about getting in the tub, the one about going to the doctor, and this being something that can't be cured, and cutting body parts off. And then when he gets in the tub, it relieves him for a second, but it makes it a whole lot worse. And by the end of it, you start feeling sorry for him as it goes along, but you find him very funny. And then you get the scene at the end where he puts the gun to his head, and you're just like, holy crap, man, this took a left turn really fast.
Yeah. He's being possessed by whatever it is that's growing on him. Like, there's and it's probably itchy and painful, and there's all kinds of stuff that goes with it. But like you said, that one, it's goofy, it's kind of funny, it's silly, it's bizarre, and then it's really dark. Just literally kaboom. Like, ugh. Yeah. And then the report of rain coming. And and you look outside, and of course his house is already covered, and you see it just spreading, so it's just the rain's just going to make it go worldwide. Kind of the same concept of Return of the Living Dead, but just in a different fashion, right? Exactly.
The ashes and whatever's in the ashes and the smoke going up into the sky, collected in the clouds, and rain back down, just going to make it worse.
And man, on Scary Dad, we did, because we used to, we talk about movies and stuff, but every now and then when you watch a movie and then you've seen it, it was fresh eyes, obviously. We watch it with fresh eyes, as if, But that one, Return of the Living Dead, was one of those that struck me, because I always, it's funny. It's got the chick dancing on the gravestones, and then, send more cops, the talking zombies and the dog and everything. So there's just so much about it that's just, it's silly, and it's a send-up to, it's a campy horror comedy.
Yeah.
But then you think about the ramifications of what that movie really means.
Yeah, absolutely.
That you can't kill them; they don't die. Even if you chop them up into little pieces, they still don't die. If you burn them, they still don't die. Like, there's no getting rid of these things. And then, like, if you're exposed to them at all, you become one, and then it's just painful forever. And it's just like, and then in the end, it's like they nuke everything. But then the smoke's just going to rain down and it's going to spread. So that's the end of it all. Like, it's a very, very bleak movie for being as silly as it is. Yeah, and Jordy Verrill's one of them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. it's the damnation of humankind, right? Sometimes it's man-made. Sometimes it's something that's foreign to us. Yeah, and during all that conversation, I was thinking of the Alien movies. Kind of the same deal, right? The perfect weapon, and if you defend yourself against them, you're still going to die.
Yeah.
You know? So, what do you do, you know?
Yeah, leave them alone. The whole Alien movie thing was like, you know, the aliens could be a good, you know, it's like stand-in for zombies, because in zombies movies, it's never really that hard to like defeat the zombies, to build a barricade against. It's always the infighting and the stupidity of the survivors. And Aliens the same way. Only it was the android that betrayed them, but it's like they knew that there was something that was up to no good down there, and they should just leave it alone, quarantine it, nuke them from above, and just wipe out the colonies. But nope, they want to turn it into a weapon, and then it turns much, much worse. You know.
Yeah. Great examples. Stephen King was on top of it.
Yep. All right, so. And I had forgot, before we recorded, I sat down because I'm always thinking of the Leslie Nielsen one. I forget the names of the stories, right? I actually jotted down the names of the stories so that we could call them by their names, and I was like, I didn't realize it was called Something to Tide You Over.
Something to Tide You Over.
It's always been the Leslie Nielsen one. But
iconic. I mean, and this is kind of a weird throwback, too, because as a kid, Leslie Nielsen, he's your funny guy, right? For us.
So is Ted Danson.
Right. So it's funny that, because my dad grew up in the generation where Leslie Nielsen was always the bad guy. Mm-hmm. So he said it was just as weird for us to see him as a bad guy as it was for them to see him as a comedy person, because he was also always just grade A-hole, you know, in everything he was in. And I believe it because I'm just, my next rad movie, Rama, is going to be Day of the Animals, and he is the biggest A-hole on the planet in that movie. Almost like he is in this one right here, man. Something to Tide You Over is, wow, you can't even believe it's the same guy, you know?
Well, I remember when he passed away, and I was reading a lot of the tributes, because, again, I knew Leslie Nielsen from the Naked Gun movies. You know, he was in a lot of, did comedy cameos and stuff like that. And, you know, reading the tributes, it was like, oh, he was such a serious actor, and he was classically trained, and he won awards for drama and Shakespeare and all. And it's like, that guy? Like, you know, I've been swimming in raw sewage. I love it. You know, like that guy. But I mean, I believed it because he's really good. But it was just like I don't see him in those roles. But apparently, he had kind of a career shift, kind of. Yeah. Midway through his career, was like, oh, well, I'll just start doing this funny stuff, and, you know, landed some big roles.
Yeah, Zucker Brothers got a hold of him, and, man, then he, you know, ended up doing Repossessed.
Vampire, was it Dead and Loving It?
Dead and Loving It. Dracula Dead and Loving It. Yeah.
But, you know, even when he was not in good movies, he was good in them. Cause he just had that deadpan, you know. And that's one of those things about horror, like, comedic actors in horror roles. Sometimes it makes them even scarier, because you know that they're the epitome of the evil clown. In that, you know, it's like, oh, they're funny, haha, but no, they're funny, you know. Right. But yeah, the Leslie Nielsen one's awesome. I love how he's got the cable running from the camera back to his house. Like, big, just long cable.
That's a lot of cable, man. I mean, he's got it on the spool on the back of his truck or his Jeeps. Yeah. And he just runs it from whatever TV he's going to, right? But man, talk about, again, it's all about the age of when you see this stuff, because I think a little older, you just kind of go, oh, yeah. But as a kid, you're going, holy crap, they're in that sand, they can't move, and just the claustrophobia of just the water hitting you and you can't move. And how cynical to run a TV.
So
while you're buried, you can see your lover, which is down the beach a ways, going through the same thing. I mean, that's about that's as evil of a twist as you can get, I think.
Oh yeah, it's super cruel.
Yeah.
And Ted Danson was always, he was funny, but he was always kind of the straight man of whatever thing he was in. He was kind of a little bit more serious, a little bit more straightforward. But to see him go like that, I mean, that's I mean, it, like you say, when you see stuff enough times, you're like, oh, okay, well, this is that one. This is that middle story of Creepshow. But then whenever you think about it, in like, wow, that's but whenever they come back, like the impossibility of them coming back, right? So the fact that they can't do that because they're dead, they're drowned, they're buried in sand and drowned in the beach. But the fact that they come back and they're all wet and covered in seaweed and stuff, and like,
it's just it's incredible. And then when Leslie Nielsen pulling out the gun and shooting them, and the black kind of just black water runs out of them, and it doesn't do anything to them. I mean, it's just like, holy smokes, man. I mean, again, them capturing the old, EC Comics or whatever they base these off of. Yeah, this is the stuff of 10 to 12-year-old boys reading these comics and just turning the page and going, whoa! Right?
Yeah.
It's exactly what they did here, and it's such a great example of what a movie like this can do. It could be the standout part of this movie.
I was gonna say between that one and The Crate, like those two, because the fluffy monster, and then of course we would just go ahead and move along, because Adrienne Barbeau absolutely, positively, without a doubt, deserved everything she got.
Oh yeah, couldn't stand her.
When she was bitching at him and he pulls out the gun and just pops her, and you don't realize that he's just daydreaming, you're just like, whoa.
And everybody gives him the golf clap.
Yeah.
Nice shot.
But yeah, that one was always so awesome. The fluffy monster, whatever kind of monster he is, wherever he comes from, just whatever, is just brutal.
Yeah.
And there's so many things in like modern horror movies where it's like they want a backstory and explain like he's killing because he's endangered. He's the last of his species. He's sympathetic. And nope, not in this one. He's just nothing but teeth and claws.
Right.
And
you are programmed to go absolutely insane when you're watching this too, because how long does it take them to open a box that says "Do not open"? I mean, they're just taking forever, and you're just like, no, don't do it.
Yeah,
leave it alone. Man, are you idiots?
Well, it was like, it's like he kills the dude, and then everybody else is just kind of like, oh, like, he must be around here somewhere. Like, no, this is the time to evacuate, right? Like, you've got something in a box, out of a box, and the box says "Do not open," and now there's a dude that's just like splattered all over the place.
Yeah.
Like, let's get a Rayovac and like search under the stairwells and stuff, right?
You must really be in a bad relationship when, instead of thinking about calling the police and having this looked at by professionals, you're thinking, how can I get my wife down here?
Right. Which is, again, that's the whole EC Comics thing. That it's like that whole, and again, back to Stephen King, he lived that life. If you've ever read his book on writing, like that biography where he's just, he was under the covers with the flashlight and the radio, reading these comic books and reading these sci-fi books and stuff, and just filling his brain full of monsters. And the way it pulls off, especially in this one, is just like you say, it's like you've got that guy that's like, he's just put upon and he just needs a way out. So if he feeds his wife to the crazy box monster, then he'll be free,
Yeah.
And
it absolutely terrified me. Fluffy scared the crap out of me as a kid. And first year I met Nicotero, he had, I don't know if it's the original one, but he had a version. It might have been it, but he had a version of Fluffy, and, you know, I'm sitting there beside it going, yeah, you know what? This don't feel good.
This is a good monster, man.
Man, it's terrifying. Absolutely. And just the fact of the strength that it had, right? Because it takes that dude's head, grabs his face, and just rams his head against the wall, and then he just does his claws down, and just like, I don't know, totally Julianne's that dude's face, man. Yeah. And that one probably did the biggest number on me, but and we'll go back and talk about him as a whole in a little bit, but yeah. Yeah, that's a good
and
one.
then there's the notorious one. The one that that is a one man's struggle to survive. I mean, just pure insanity, and whether or not it's his own mind going on him, or whether he's been sabotaged, or just any of the different ways, because, you know, all the phone calls of people bitching at him for ruining their lives. It's like, he's just kind of in his own little personal hell, and it's perfectly sanitized. But this one earns the title Creepshow, because it is creepy. Yeah. And it's called They're Creeping Up on You. And, and that's the one that kids would talk about at school.
Yeah.
Man, you talk about the Leslie Nielsen one. You talk about the seaweed on Sam from Cheers or something. Be like, but did you see the cockroach one?
Right.
Like, the cockroach one, man. And again, watching it not too long ago, that one's a little hard to take, just because it just really gets that ick factor on you. Just like the creepy crawlies,
it still works.
Yeah,
it
totally.
Still works. I mean, it's, and that's something you can't pass by on this stuff either. I mean, some of the effects are made to look a little hokey because, again, it's the comic book world. But there's some that are just top notch, and this is one of them for sure, man. The scene at the end when his body just bust open, and they're crawling out of every nook and cranny of him. Unreal. Still looks fantastic.
Again, still, you'll say it. And again, if you want to rain them down from their scariest or their coolest, or what, but this one certainly takes it for the creepiest. I mean, it holds up. And again, watching it not too long ago, I'm squeamish watching it. I'm just kind of like, ugh. And I'm not really that overly freaked out by bugs, but just the way that they filmed it, and just the way he's so freaked out about them, and the fact that they just keep coming out of everything is ugh.
And the thing about every one of these stories too, the people that this stuff happens to deserves it. So and that's, of course, that's the documentary called Just Desserts, right? I mean, that's kind of the whole point of what it's about. And man, you want these people to have a bad ending.
Totally.
Man.
But man.
I mean, later on, and I'll never forget that later on I figured out, wait a minute, the guy with the cockroaches busting out of his neck is the same guy that's the president in Superman 2.
Well,
yeah, and then you get your closing
hopefully they got
scene,
rid of the
right?
cockroaches.
They covered in cockroaches. But then the ending where the kid ordered a voodoo doll out of the back of the comic book, and hates his dad so much that he's wanting to use a voodoo doll on him, and
it starts working.
Yeah, it starts working, and that's pretty messed up.
Yeah. Well, and that's, Stephen King. Well, I mean, George Romero was never one to pull punches.
Right.
Stephen King doesn't pull punches at all. I mean, he might be a, people love an old fart now, but back in the day, he'd stomp a dog to death just, You know, like
Yep.
he's
Yep. It's true.
You know, like he didn't personally do it, but he'd certainly set some characters on some rampages that were not nice.
True.
And again, this is him at his. This is Stephen King top form.
Yep.
I mean, this right here was 1982, so he was just right at the top of his game as far as those early. I mean, he's always been good, but this was the best. I think some of the best Stephen King adaptations that have been, and
Romero,
it holds up.
Romero too, man. I mean, Romero. This was kind of his heyday too, when he could get things past like Knight Rider. The Knight Riders movie. Yeah, I mean, Dawn of the Dead solidified him into. Yeah, what do you want to do next, George? Here's your money, go do it. Right?
Yep.
So, yeah, it's one of those combinations that you kind of wish we would see again of some sort. And didn't always work out for the best, but this one worked out. I don't know if you could really do it any better.
I don't think you could do it. I mean, the only way you could do it better is have the same team come in and beat Creepshow 2. Right. You know what I mean? Like yeah. Really. But then you think about in the 80s, too, there was a lot of anthology movies. Different, like you had Tales from the Dark Side, which again was Stephen King, but that was based off the TV show, which Tales from the Dark Side.
Tales from the Crypt.
Well, yeah, Tales from the Crypt, too, but Tales from the Dark Side, I remember because of the damn opening sequence where everything turns gray.
Yeah.
And it's just like, boom, and it's just like, and there's some Tales from the Dark Side that haunt me to this day. Like, I used to watch Tales from the Crypt as well. Love Tales from the Crypt, but
oh yeah,
I was like, but the Tales from the Dark Side, the movie was Stephen King written, I believe, or at least a couple of the stories were. But this holds up, man. Again, it wasn't a couple 3 months ago that I watched it just for the hell of it, and I found myself just as squeamished out by the cockroaches, just as kind of, like you say, kind of like, man, the cable running from the Jeep. Like, how sadistic do you have to be to run? Like there was no Wi-Fi back then. You were running like RG6.
I just wish they would have showed him, like, crimping the ends and putting the twisties on. And
but it's just, like you say, it just holds up. And good writing, good storytelling does, and again, we had anthology like House. The House movies were awesome. Remember those? Some of their stories were better than others. But House and House 2. But like there were a lot of anthologies type things that people did, and even with comedies, like your off the wall comedies like Airplane and. Naked Gun and stuff that just, I mean, it all kind of got pigeonholed into the scary movie series. Like if a Wayans brother was making a goofy comedy, otherwise there wasn't no goofy comedies. But back in the 80s, there was a lot of that kind of stuff. So, Creepshow came back as a series on Shudder. Have you seen it?
I haven't had a chance to watch them yet, but I want to.
I've watched a couple of them. They're all right. They're not. I mean, it's very much a throwback to this old school stuff. I just don't have a whole lot of time to sit there and just watch hours of TV. But it is good. I enjoy it. So,
Nicotero, right? Isn't Nicotero doing it? So yeah, it's got my vote. So
yeah,
I'm the same way. I haven't had a chance to watch it. I was too busy watching Cobra Kai.
Oh man. Well, if we can talk about 2 weeks ago again, Cobra Kai is awesome.
Yeah, it is.
So, have you watched The Boys?
Have not.
Okay, so Elizabeth Shue is in The Boys, right? And spoilers or whatever, but she's in the second season, but she's not in the second season very much. And I want to say that because she's probably going over to Cobra Kai. So it looked like
I already
looked
heard
like
that was happening, so
they thought she were going to have maybe a little bit bigger role in season 2, but then looks like she's going to go moderate the warring karate gyms. All right, let's take a break real quick, and we will come back and talk about the other one.
All right. Let me do. Camera kept moving on me.
All right, I'm still recording, so.
Okay, yeah, me too.
Well, I mean, my camera is. So.
Yeah.
I want to make sure, because it was giving me weirdness at the beginning, so. All right, we are back. And, yeah. So.
Creepshow 2.
Part 2. And again, this one just kind of lives in my psyche. Like, the first one was there, and we would talk about it in school, and we'd watch it and see it on TV. But part 2, and even then, I remember not too terribly long ago, Scott and I were doing a Scary Dad, and he was watching Creepshow 2, but it was on, when I showed up to his house, it was on The Hitchhiker, which is the third segment of the movie, and I was like, oh, Creepshow. And he's like, yeah, part 2. Like, so it was just like, the only one in my head that was Creepshow 2 specifically stood out was the raft, you know, because that's just one of them. But we'll start at the beginning and go to old Chief Woodenhead.
Chief Woodenhead, man. Yeah.
This is another one like we were talking about. Like, I've got a huge collection of horror comics. I don't have a whole lot of the old school ECs or Weird Tales or whatever, because those Comics Code ones, even in crappy condition, can run you a couple $100 for a single issue, and they're kind of hard to find, and they're expensive because everybody likes them. Mm-hmm. But I've got a lot of the reprints, and a lot of those stories they're pretty short and sweet. Like, they don't do a whole lot, because the books themselves were, again, anthologies, so you'd have, 4 or 5 stories in one regular sized comic book. So if you think about, like a Batman comic where he's got like a story or 2, with the horror comics they'd have, 3 or 4. So the stories themselves would have to be shorter and get to the good stuff pretty quick. So you'd usually have your exposition in the first couple panels, and then, whatever sets the monster off in the next couple panels, and then 2 or 3 pages of mayhem. And that's exactly how Chief Woodenhead works. Yep. Because that's pretty much, we were talking at the beginning of like Father's Day, how there's a little bit of dialogue that's a little confusing. There's nothing confusing in this one. Old Chief Woodenhead takes out the trash pretty good.
he gets to business, doesn't he? It's again Savini work, right? I mean, it's hey, we need you to make a wooden Indian that can go around and kill some bad guys. Yeah, let's do it.
He uses the spray paint to like fix his war paint.
Yeah.
like the wooden fingers, and again, this is all before CGI. This is all practical effects. There was no Terminator 2 back then. So, like everything you see on the screen is not what it seems, but it is what it is. Like you don't have any green screen or, it's all practical effects or animation, which they did with Chief Woodenhead.
They did a bit more animation in this one in general, too, because even the opening and the closing goes to a more animated kind of feel versus the straight-up comic kind of feel of the first. So, yeah, there's some differences, but the stories are still solid. I mean, you absolutely hate these kids that come in here and mess up George Kennedy's place, and, yeah, you want him to get knocked off.
Well, that's fun too because you know what's coming as soon as Chief Woodenhead starts moving, and it's kind of shown in the shadows of just like his hands and like little shots of his face, and he's getting, but then he gets that tomahawk and starts walking, and you're like, well, he's gonna take care of some business, and he takes care of some business.
But in today's standard too, I mean, that's something that people would go, oh man, they just cut to a silhouette, of him walking. It's like, well, you kind of had to because you don't want to, you're limited on what you can do. So there's some things you have to let your imagination take over, and that's something we've really lost. And I know we probably say this as generations go on because that's what made the 50s and 60s movies work was what happens here instead of what happens on the screen. I think we were kind of the last group to actually do that. I think from the 90s on, we made a mistake of showing everything, and it kind of kills it.
I agree, because we were watching Beetlejuice the other night, and, I mean, we could do a show on how perfect Beetlejuice is, right?
Yeah, sure.
But there is claymation, there's choppy animation, there's practical makeup effects that don't necessarily, it's like not specifically smoothly CG'd or whatever.
Right.
But I remember watching that movie in the theater when it came out, and it was so real. It was so thorough. Like, I didn't notice all of that stuff until I was older, and been up against CGI for so long. I didn't realize that it was so, like, it was as real as anything whenever I saw it. So, like I think you're right. You get a little bit spoiled to what you see all the time, and you have the lights turned on too much. Because even when you watch old movies like The Terminator or whatever, it's like whenever he's fixing his eye, like cutting his eye out and stuff, you can tell it's a rubber head. It didn't look like a rubber head back then.
Yeah. Well, and the mentality back then, too, is this is a one-time pass kind of deal. I mean, unless you just absolutely love the movie, the chances of you buying it were very slim. Whereas now, you just go to Walmart and buy whatever movie you want or order it off of Amazon. So, back then, the movie experience, it's going to look real that first time because you can't sit and analyze it. But when you buy a copy of it and you watch it 1,000 times, right? You start saying, "Wait a minute, that CGI looks pretty weak now." Well, yeah, it does because it was state of the art at the time. But I don't know. That's one of those things we've lost, right? It's one of those things I get sad about because we have allowed the effect to take over the movie experience. So, in other words, it's the reason we get all the remakes, because all they do in the remakes is just do better effects, because they don't really add to the story in most cases. There was a conversation about this today on Facebook, but remakes just kind of they up the level and try to make it a little more modern, but they don't give it any really new life as far as the story itself or anything. So yeah, it ends up making it more stale. Yeah, whoopity-doo, the effects are a little better. But you don't care anything about any of the characters. So it's amazing that a movie like Creepshow, if you don't have compassion for George Kennedy, then you're in the wrong movie, because that's the way this is built. That's really who you're taking the ride with. And Chief Woodenhead is the equalizer.
Yeah. What do you get when you put a whole bunch of teenagers on a raft and throw a half-inflated garbage bag into the lake? And it's absolute horror, right? Like,
yeah, man.
But I mean,
when you see it out just floating around, you're like, it kind of looks a little ridiculous, right? But what happens when it actually gets a hold of people? It's still mind-boggling how those effects are so good.
And they're so gross. Like, it's like, it's kind of like the Blob or whatever, but it's
exactly
like
what I was thinking.
It's a tar blob, so it's like, even though it's peeling off, it's still in that like black and gray gook, like, and it's tar.
The stuff you always drug your fishing line through when you were a kid. You were like, "Get that crap off my line!" Right?
So I've got a funny story about the raft in real life. So years and years ago, we rented a condo at this place. We had an event going to. So it was me and my friend Terrence, me and Meg, my friend Terrence, and his girlfriend. Everybody's married with children now, and I think I was married back then. But anyway, so we're staying at this place, and it's off of River and Lake in New Braunfels. But there's this swimming hole, but it's a paid swimming hole. So you have to like walk up and pay like $5 to get into the swimming hole. And they got a chain link fence that goes around it. And the river passes through under the chain link fence, and then like this is the property we're staying on. So we wanted to go swimming, but we didn't get back in time, and so the place was closed. So we were outside in the yard playing frisbee, and I noticed that there was a hole in the chain link fence. Somebody had cut a hole in the chain link fence, and it had been there for a long time. This is where the neighborhood kids go in there to go swimming. Yeah. So it's a pond. It's a pond that's been dammed off part of a river. So the water's actually flowing a little bit, slow flow, and it's got one of those rafts in the middle of it out, and it's it's not a huge, maybe 2 or 3 Olympic-sized pools worth of water. So it's not a massive, it's not a lake. Like, you're not going to get in a boat and go ride on it. Yeah. But the thing's out there, a couple, maybe 200 yards or something. So sun goes down. Terrence and I decide we're going to go swimming. So go through the hole in the chain link fence. Funny thing is, my wife's like, don't come back. Like, don't bash your head on a rock. I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to bash my head on a rock. So we go down there. Swim out to the raft, right? Hop in the water, swim out to the raft. Get to the raft, pull ourselves out, sit on the raft. Both of us are like, damn, this is kind of like Creepshow. And yeah, so we rest for a minute. It's like, all right, let's go ahead and swim back to the shore. So we both hop in, swim. There's no garbage monster. We're fine. We get out, hang out for a bit, then decide, okay, let's go back up the hill, get back with the girls, make some dinner. So we're going back through the hole in the fence, and I raise my head just slightly, and I feel it. It is the cut in the chain link fence, that galvanized steel, thunk right into the top of my head like a staple. Doesn't hurt, but it itched. It didn't hurt, but it was just kind of like thunk. I'm like, uh-oh. Anyway, so we didn't even have towels. We were just walking down the hill. So we're walking back up the hill. It's dark outside. We're sitting there talking. And I reach up and I scratch my itching head, and I pull my hand away, and it is just absolutely covered in blood. Like, just it's like Carrie, right? Right. It's just like, I've got a flow of blood coming out the top of my head. And it never hurt. Nothing. I'm like, hey, man, so, we go step into this porch light. I need you to take a look at me, man. He's like, oh, my God. What did you do? So I got this, puncture wound in the top of my head, and it's bleeding out my hair and down my face. And I wasn't wearing a shirt, so, but the lake water was all on me, so I'm, just completely just drenched in blood, like I said, like Carrie style. Oh, and I was like, okay, well, we got to run some damage control on this, because my wife specifically told me not to bash my head in. And now we're walking back up the hill, and I'm bleeding from a head wound here, right? So we get up the hill. I'm go inside and explain what happened before anybody sees me, because I don't have it. I can't wipe it off. Right. I'm just. And he goes, but they happen to be outside, so she sees me, freaks absolutely out, which of course makes me start laughing, because I'm just I'm fine, and she's
you're not hurt. Yeah.
She's freaks out, and when she realizes I'm fine, she just slaps me oh my God, you scared the hell out of me. I'm like, that's fine, just let me go take a shower. So I took a shower, got all cleaned off, but she was mad at me for the whole rest of the trip. I'm like, dude, I didn't mean to get hurt. Poking a hole in the top of my head was not on my agenda, but
I told you specifically.
That was the problem, was I was told, probably because I laughed, but anyway.
Wow. Yeah, man, the whole character building in the raft too, because you got the guy that's infatuated with the girl, and you kind of get a weird touchy-feely thing that happens, and then wow, it just the movie knew how to drive you and make the turns and you not know where it was going to happen, which is very unusual for movies like this. I think The Ralph is one of the better ones out of both movies as far as execution. That's just my thought on it.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's like you can't go to a lake and see one of those rafts out absolutely. In a lake somewhere without thinking of this clip of this movie, right? And then, call it what it is, the sexual harassment scene where he's like, she's asleep and he starts feeling her up, and you're like, okay, well that's bizarre. Well, that's actually in the book. It's in, like, that's Stephen King, it's in Skeleton Crew. And it explains that essentially whatever the monster was hypnotizing them. It was trying to throw their concentration off so that it could get them.
Wow.
And so
who knew that pond scum could be so smart?
Yeah. Well, it was working. It was like, it was described as kind of like almost like a snake, where it would just kind of hold you and like get into your head, right? Yeah. So in the book, he didn't just like start randomly feeling her up. They were just sitting there trying to pass the time and figure out something to do, and it just literally popped into both of their minds. Like, here's a way we can kill some time, but it like
something just popped up.
Yeah, it just but then like once they were doing it, then it crawled up under the raft and got her, and yeah. So it's, I mean, there's so many layers to that one too, because it's a trash bag monster. It's the tar monster, and it doesn't do anything but just float around.
And you get the guy that swims back and beats it and gets to the other side and gets out and says, "I beat you," and it just reaches up and grabs him, and wow,
never had a chance, bro. No, this is one of those, whenever you escape from the trash monster, you just get up and keep running.
Right.
They're hopping in one of the cars and like, don't stop, turn around and start making fun of the trash monster, because it doesn't have your best interest at heart. And then the final one, the brutal one, man.
This is one that either people don't like because they think it's too funny. I've seen people just laugh all the way through it. And then there's ones like me whose imagination got the best of them, and it terrified me.
I never thought it was funny. I mean, I remember my dad cracking jokes about how somebody would cut him off in traffic or something. He'd be like, "Thanks for the ride, lady." Right. Something like that. Like, he turned it into a joke. But the show itself, I never thought that it was particularly funny. I mean, it's got its couple little scenes where you're like, oh, you think she's getting away, but then he just kind of pops up out of nowhere and he's like, "Hey, I'm still mad." I think
what it is it reminds us of, and this is just popped in my head, but remember on the Looney Tunes when Daffy Duck's trying to be Robin Hood, and he goes, "Yikes!" and away, and he swings and hits the next tree. "Yikes!" and away, and he hits the next. "Yikes!" and that's kind of what this is, except somebody's doing that to this guy.
Yeah.
It goes from "thanks for the ride, lady" to "thanks for the ride, lady," right?
It's because she keeps bashing him up with her car that's already killed him.
Gets him against a tree, is just like...
And the thing is, he's not really there, so that's kind of the thing, is she's she's been haunted by her own guilt. And that makes it quite creepy. And then her husband comes home at the end, and like, after she's bashed her car all up and it's like leaking smoke and stuff, then but all the investigators are gonna think is like, oh, she hit a hitchhiker and then just couldn't live with it. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, because that's what it looks like at the end, right?
Just desserts.
But Yeah. And then just, he kind of reminds me of Homeboy in American Werewolf, because he's just, like, every time you see him, he's just that much worse.
Yeah.
And that much
Getting a little
worse.
worse.
And then that much worse.
He looks like Uncle Woody from Sanford and Son, but he goes through the transformation like dude does in American Werewolf. Yeah, man, I just again, at the age when this came out, my horror movie viewing had been pretty limited. I'd seen what's considered the classics, your Halloween, Friday the 13th, that stuff. This was unlike anything I'd seen at this time, because these short stories, all these different characters, just, it was intriguing because you had monsters, right? It wasn't just a regular old lunatic running around killing people. This was actual monsters, or people becoming monsters, or like I said, it reminded me of Night Gallery, but with more of the actual monster part being involved. So I think that was the draw for me, and yeah, they never get old.
Mm-mm. Well, and that's, so many of the movies, because whether it's Karate Kid, or whether it was Jaws 3, or whether it was just about anything else, you have to remember, well, we remember, for the young'uns out there that don't remember, or never had this experience, it's like you'd have basic cable, and basic cable had like news channels, and then it had, and we didn't have infomercials back then. Like you'd have commercials for things like Medicare, or some like extra long commercials for something of that nature. Maybe the Franklin Mint selling plates, but we didn't have entire channels of commercials like we do now, like infomercial commercials, so like channels and QVC and all that stuff. We had shows, and those shows were maybe edited for TV, so sometimes, you'd see a movie that you never knew had bad words in it until you saw it one day at your friend's house, and you're like, oh, wow. Like that kind of stuff. But there were different versions of movies, and then there were movies that were just on all the time. And Creepshow and Creepshow 2 were two of them that were just in rotation. They were on HBO. Yeah. I don't remember people having VHSs of them. I just remember seeing them on TV all the time. Yeah. And but you saw them, and again, you could sit down and watch it for 20 minutes, and then go out and play. Go do something else. You didn't have to sit there and watch the whole film. And a lot of times we didn't. Like when we were kids, you didn't. You roll in on your skateboard and get a bologna sandwich and watch TV for 20 minutes and then bounce again, because that's what we did. We weren't stuck on screens all the time.
True.
So that's what makes it so good, is it's just part of the psyche, and it's just these, again, they're not good guys. It's not like, it's like, say what you want about the Friday the 13th kids deserving it. Nobody deserves to get impaled like that. Like even if they have sex, they're innocent victims, whether they're likable or not. They didn't do anything to really deserve getting stabbed. The people in Creepshow, you're kind of rooting for them to go down, because they're not good guys. So it's almost more fun, because you're like, yeah, get them.
It's more fun, but it also gives you you're reflecting on your own morals, because you are determining these people are bad. Like you said, Friday the 13th, they're doing what typical teenage kids do, right? But we're seeing people that are cheating on their spouses, being abusive. I mean, we're seeing this stuff in these movies, and morally you're saying, yeah, man, these people are bad people. So, in a weird kind of way, you're kind of getting taught good versus evil.
Yeah, a little bit. And don't feel up the sleeping chick whenever the trash monster's floating around.
Tried it, doesn't work.
Yeah. She looks a whole lot better with her face on.
Yes. And you look better without your leg folded up against your face like this when you get pulled down. So. Cool.
Well, man, I've had fun with this one. The Creepshow series has always been good. Hey, guys, again, we're not turning into a horror show. This is just the Halloween spooky season. Next week, we're going to touch on another series, something like The Evil Dead or something like that. I'm not sure yet. We've got to discuss, but we've got a lot of stuff on the agenda. You guys rooted and voted, so we're going to do a real deep dive into the Universal monsters. Did you know that Bruce the Shark is a Universal monster? Yes, he is. So we've got a lot to talk about, and so yeah, we're
awesome.
creeping towards Halloween. So everything's awesome.
Everything is awesome.
It is. So yeah, we will see you next week.
Absolutely.